Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you. We're gonna get started here to make sure that we can get you all home in a respectable time frame. First of all, welcome all of you. Thank you for coming. I'm very excited, and also that all of you, that so many of you are interested in this topic. So thank you for coming. A few housekeeping items just real quick. So first, if you have cell phones with you, which I'm sure all of you do, please turn them off on airplane mode or on silent. This meeting is being videotaped just because we thought those that cannot attend tonight, then we'll have the opportunity later on this week to visit our website, and it will be posted there under our YouTube. Also, if you would like to revisit the meeting online, you can do that as well. The meeting agenda has been posted, or you saw that as you walked in. I'd like to ask that you hold your questions until the end of the presentation, with one exception. What we're going to do, we have to switch it up a little bit because one of our guest speakers needs to leave earlier than expected. And so once our professor has spoken, we will then take questions regarding lawn care. Other than that, please write your questions down, even if you haven't already. Feel free to write them on these little tickets. And then if you would, I'm going to give the people on the ends a little bit of a job. Take those, hand them down to the people on the ends and hold them out, and our staff will collect them. After the presentation, then we will read these questions and answer, and trying to get all of your questions answered. If we have time at the end, we'll also open it up to questions from the floor. So I'd like to start out with a few introductions. So in case you haven't figured this out yet, I'm Lisa Whalen, and I'm your mayor, if you are a Minnetrista resident, and I assume you all are. This evening, we also have 3 of our council members present. We have Pam Mortensen, Kathleen Refkin, and Ann McGregor. And no, we are not all women, although majority. John Chumberlain is not able to be with us. He has some health issues tonight. Also, we have staff with us, and I'd like to introduce them to you. We have, this is our consultant with WSB, our city engineer, Allison Fauski. We have Allie Palfus, who is our director of administration, and she is the one that does all of our communications. In fact, she organizes meetings like this. She does our website, our emails, and also our newsletters. So she's responsible, among other things. That's one of her responsibilities. Then next to her, we have Jasper Krugel, who is our brand new city administrator. So be nice to him. We want him to stay a while. And then next to him, we have Gary Peters, who is our superintendent, supervisor of our public works superintendent. Thank you. And then we also have some guest speakers. We have Eric Watkins, who is a U of M professor of horticultural science, and he will be speaking on lawn care this afternoon. And I want to say thank you very much, Professor, for being here. I know it's time out of your busy schedule. We have Jason Merkel with the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources scheduled to be here. He's not here yet. We're still hoping that he'll show, but he said he was going to be here. So with that, move on to the next one. I'm going to first start with Keep going. That one. Thank you.
Sorry.
Yep. Eric will come on real soon here. So I just kind of want to go over a little bit why we're here tonight. So first off, why are we here? I think there's a lot of misinformation out there, and we hope that there's no better way of providing our residents with information and knowledge than an in-person meeting. We want to make sure that you get the correct information, and also that questions that you may have can be answered. Our goal tonight is that you leave here with confidence and trust in your city council and your city staff that we will continue to deliver quality water to your home. We also want to have a positive interaction here tonight, so we all need to be respectful. What have we done in the past, and what are we doing, and what are we going to be doing? These are some of the things we're going to be talking about tonight. Last year, of course, we experienced very, very hot and very, very dry weather conditions leading into actual drought conditions, which increased our water demands on our water system. We'll be talking about that a little bit later. Our plant had never ever before, up until last summer, had to be pushed to its limits. And that's one of the issues that we faced last summer. What we're doing presently is we're doing this. We're doing a water educational campaign. And what we want to do is we want to educate our residents on water use and how to be conservative and how to be responsible water users. That's number one. The other thing is we also need to expand our water infrastructure. We know that, we're aware of that, and we're working on that. One of the things that we're doing is we're going to be drilling 2 new wells and also building a new treatment plant in addition to the one that's on the southern water treatment system. So in the end, within the next 3 to 4 years, we will have 4 wells and 2 water treatment systems and 2 water towers just on our southern water system. That's in addition to the infrastructure that we have in the northern system, which consists of a water tower as well as a treatment plant. To do these wells, we also need to drill. Currently, what we're working on is our test wells. You have to do test wells before you do your final wells to make sure that wherever you're drilling is going to give you the water capacity that you need. So I've already talked a little bit about the future, a new water treatment plant, and we'll also continue our efforts to reduce our water use, and this is by state statute. With that, I'm now going to hand it over to Professor Watkins, and he's going to talk about lawn care.
Thank you for having me. So I'll just make, I just got a couple slides here, and I'll be happy to take your many questions. So last year, of course, we had very dry conditions, very rare dry conditions, right? So everybody's thinking about drought. So we want to think about if drought happens again in the future, what can you do during a drought? But mostly I want to talk about what you can do to kind of leading into a drought or preparing for the next drought. Or things you should do when there's no drought. That there's a lot of activities that you probably overwater. A lot of people, not necessarily you, but a lot of people overwater on years when there's not drought. So that's a big focus of some of the lawn water conservation efforts we have at the university. So my research is on plant breeding genetics primarily, but also other turf grass management issues. So developing new grasses that need less water, need less fertilizer, things like that. Grasses that grow slower. So we want grasses that function well without a lot of inputs. And water is one of those inputs. Okay, so last summer we had a pretty severe drought here, one of the most severe droughts we've had in quite some time, maybe since '88. And the question is, what should have you done during the drought? So not what you did do, but what should have you maybe done? One thing, we're going to have to adjust our irrigation practices, right? A lot of times that is because of local ordinances and things like that. We're going to talk more about how to think about irrigation scheduling later. The second one's a big one. Do not mow your lawn. That's a major problem when you mow your grass when it's really stressed. And I saw a lot of examples last summer where people lost grass because they mowed when it was stressed, when it was really hot and dry, and then they mowed. There's really no reason to mow it. The reason it gets mowed is because there might be a few weeds popping up, right? But if you go and mow during that hot, stressful, dry period, you're going to have bigger problems than a few weeds. You're going to kill some of that grass. So staying off the grass and not mowing during those periods is really important. Do not do other practices either. Don't fertilize, don't spray, don't do things that might add additional stress to the lawn. The lawn is already very stressed from drought and heat, so you don't want to add any other problems. So just let it be. And allowing the lawn to go dormant is fine. Now this is going to vary depending on the grass species that you have. Now most of you probably have Kentucky bluegrass. Kentucky bluegrass can go dormant and stay dormant for quite some time. Now you don't want to push it too long, but the drought we had last year was probably fine. 40, 50 days of drought with Kentucky bluegrass, it can go dormant. It's still alive. It looks like it's not alive, but it's still alive. And then when rain returns, it's going to green back up. There could be some complicated issues. Maybe you have grub damage on top of a drought stress situation, and then maybe you'll have some death of the bluegrass. But by and large, if you let Kentucky bluegrass go dormant, it's going to pop right back up, no problem. Some of the other grasses I'm going to talk about that are more drought tolerant actually do not have quite the same dormancy mechanism. So in those cases, they will stay green longer during drought, but then you might have to hit them a little water here and there during the drought. Not a lot of water, but a little bit of water during the drought, just to make sure that they don't go into complete dormancy for too long a period of time. Next slide. Okay, so now you're getting out of drought. So you get a drought, and you're letting the lawn go dormant. You're not mowing it. You're not fertilizing it. You're reducing pests. You're not using pesticides. Now you're going to and if restrictions have been lifted, and you got an irrigation strategy. You want to start implementing irrigation. And one thing you need to do during recovery is be patient. It sometimes takes some time for that lawn to recover, and there's no need to overwater. Sometimes I think people come out of drought and they feel they got to just push a lot of water on there, but you just need to give the grass enough water to recover. You don't want to overwater that grass. Overwatering in general is just a bad idea. Especially when the grass is healthy and growing and you overwater, you're discouraging root development. So you're kind of babying it too much. So you want to stop doing that, stop overwatering. And same thing with recovery. Start putting water back on, but usually if we're out of drought, rain is coming, right? So you might not even have to water anyway because we have a return of rain. A lot of times in Minnesota, with that drought period last year being the exception, usually rain is enough for most of our lawns in Minnesota if managed properly. Here again, wait for active growth before mowing. So just because it rains, don't go out there and mow. You want to get active growth. You want that grass to green up, start seeing some vertical growth. Don't mow it until you need to mow it, and make sure that grass is actively growing and flourishing post-drought. You want to delay any planned management practices. So if you are at a time of year when you typically would fertilize, let's say the drought lasts into August and we have a recovery period, you want to wait on fertilization so that turf is back to normal, maybe in early September. You don't want to do any aerification or dethatching or anything like that until the lawn is fully recovered. The last one's a big one. So if you do have damage and you've got a grass that you weren't happy with its performance during drought, that's a good time to go in and start switching out the grass that you have. So if you have Kentucky bluegrass and you're really focused on drought tolerance, you might switch to other grasses, such as the tall fescue, for instance. If you have a sunny yard and you want a good, robust grass that has deep roots, tall fescue is a good option. You could mix some tall fescue with that bluegrass. We do a lot of work on the fine fescue species. This is a group of grasses. You've probably seen them mostly in shady areas, but very fine leaf texture. They grow very slowly. They don't need a lot of water. They don't need a lot of fertilizer. You just leave them alone and they look really good. They do well in sun or shade. The fine fescues are a good option as well. There's several of them. Hard fescue, Chewing's fescue, and strong creeping red fescue are probably the three top ones that you might run into where you buy your grass seed. So if you have a damaged area, don't necessarily go back with the same grass seed that you were starting with if you weren't happy with its performance. Now I'm not going to talk about how to select grass seed. That's a whole other talk. But you can go to our website, turf.umn.edu. So turf.umn.edu, and I have some blog posts. You'll see some resources about selecting seed. It's a little bit more difficult than it should be, but we've outlined a few steps for you to take. You can go back one, I guess. The pictures on the right are just showing, we do quite a bit of drought work on campus, so we're showing before drought on the top, and then after about 60 days of drought, and then after about 4 weeks of recovery. So we do a lot of that work to select the best grasses and mixtures that might be useful for Minnesota, and some of those resources are available on our website. Okay, so number one, use better irrigation technologies. So the Metropolitan Council sponsors quite a bit of work in our program on this topic of educating people about things you can do to reduce water use. And one of the big ones is use better irrigation technology. So a lot of people have in-ground irrigation systems in their lawns, right? And there's different technologies that you can use with those irrigation systems to improve the efficiency of the systems. One technology that's really important is the off switch, right? You don't always need to have it on. So a lot of summers in Minnesota, you just have to go down to your garage and just turn it off. But if it's a summer where we might need some irrigation, you want to make sure you're watering when the grass needs to be watered, right? You don't want to water when we've had a big storm or during a rain event. So there's several different ways that these home irrigation controllers can be operated, right? And most of you have seen some of these to some degree. Every system is required by law to have some sort, new systems anyway, have some sort of rain shutoff, right? So some of you have seen these. The most basic rain shutoff is this little thing you mount on your garage, somewhere out in the open. It's got a little piece of cork in it. The rain falls on it, expands, and it turns off the irrigation system if it gets too wet. So that's fine, but the problem with it is after it dries out, then that irrigation system is back to normal operation. So that expansion can happen with a 1/4 inch or 6 inches, right? So you're not adjusting your irrigation based on the type of rain event you had. So it's not all that great. It's better than nothing, right? But there's maybe better options. Another thing that you can do is install a soil moisture sensor in your lawn. And these soil moisture sensors, they detect how much water is in the soil. And that's really what you're interested in, right? How much water is in the soil? How much water is there for that grass to access? So a soil moisture sensor, you'll set the soil moisture sensor based on your soil type and other characteristics. And if it's too wet, it'll turn that irrigation system off. And then once the soil dries to a point where watering is needed for the grass to do well, then the irrigation system will be back on its regular program. So that's a really good technology. You can add those on to many of the modern irrigation controllers. The third thing is what's called a smart controller or smart technology controller. And what that does, it uses Wi-Fi to connect to local weather stations and does things like, okay, it rained yesterday and it's predicted to rain tomorrow. There's no need to have irrigation today. That's a simple example, but that kind of thing where you can kind of look forward and backward using weather station data. The combination of soil moisture sensor and smart irrigation control is kind of the idea. But there's all these different things, and they're coming down in price. Some communities have subsidized offerings. I don't know if we have that here, but they're not that expensive anymore, and you can save a lot of water. So if you do depend on a irrigation controller and you want to keep depending on the irrigation controller, I would encourage you to look into purchasing one of those two technologies. So either a soil moisture sensor or a smart controller. Auditing your irrigation system is really important. Make sure the water is going where you think it's going. Make sure it's not watering the driveway, or make sure you don't have broken heads, things like that. There's a lot of cases where you'll see a lot of wasted water due to systems that just haven't been audited. We have instructions, and the University of Minnesota Extension website has instructions for how to audit on your own, or you could hire a company to do that. It's not terribly expensive. Third one's really important. Raise your mowing height. Raising the mowing height's good for a lot of reasons. It reduces weeds, which reduces the need for pesticides. The grass is going to be more stress tolerant, but it's particularly going to be more tolerant of drought stress. So raise that mowing height. So if you're mowing at 2.5 inches, you should raise it maybe 3.5 inches. You'll be plenty happy with your lawn, and it will really help on water use. We've done research that's shown this very clearly. As you lower the mowing height, it's going to be more stressed from drought. There's less rooting, the turf is more stressed. Raise that mowing height. You don't have to have it up at 6-7 inches. Just raise it up 3.5, 4 inches, and it'll make a nice lawn, and it'll really save a lot of need for irrigation. And then finally, like I said before, plant drought tolerant grasses. Like I said, tall fescue can work well. It's got a few weaknesses that can be kind of masked with Kentucky bluegrass, so we actually recommend mixing tall fescue and Kentucky bluegrass, maybe 90% by weight tall fescue, 10% by weight Kentucky bluegrass, something like that. And then the fine fescues are also a really good option. So that's a brief overview. I'll take questions now, but this is we're on Twitter, and then we have our turfgrass science website, turf.umn.edu, where we talk about our research, and we have a lot of resources for purchasing seed, things like that. And then also the University of Minnesota Extension Lawn Care site is a really good resource with lots of articles and things that can help you if you have lawn questions.
So what we're going to do right now is Allie has gathered the questions, and she has picked out the ones that pertain specifically for Professor Watkins here, and we'll read those. He will answer those, I'm sure. And Allie.
Okay. What is the ideal watering schedule and amount to build a drought-resistant lawn?
Ideal watering schedule to build a drought-resistant lawn. So it's gonna depend on lots of factors, right? I'm not gonna give you a number. Sometimes you'll hear like an inch a week, but that's not always the case. An inch a week is not always the case. If you have a heavier soil, if it's a little cooler, I don't think with a lower water use grass, I don't think an inch is needed. But in general, you wanna water less frequently and a little more water than you maybe would typically. So if you're somebody who waters every day, you should back off to like twice a week, but then water a little more on those 2 days than you would have otherwise, right? So less frequency, more water. But in general, you can probably back off the total amount of water that you have. I would say 8 years out of 10 in the Twin Cities, you wouldn't really need to water at all if you did some of the other things I've talked about, raise the mowing height, things like that, or water very infrequently. But if you've got a regular schedule, back off on the number of days, and then you can increase the amount of water per watering event a little bit. In terms of time, you want to do it early morning. So water 4 a.m. to 7 a.m. somewhere.
Okay. Does the type or quality of soil beneath a Kentucky bluegrass lawn decrease the lawn's tolerance to drought?
Yeah, so soils are really important. If you have a really compacted soil and the roots aren't able to penetrate it very well, or they don't get a lot of air, a lot of oxygen in the soil, or too compacted, that's going to be a problem, and they're not going to be as resilient. Those roots aren't going to get down to get water deeper in the soil profile. Sometimes, especially in new construction, you get layering where there's finer textured soil layers here and there that are causing layers, and the roots don't get through those very well. So soils are really important. Sometimes you can't do anything about your soil, right? But you can do things to make it a little better. You could aerify once in a while if you have a really compacted soil. But soils are really important. So especially with bluegrass, it does need a fair bit of water, and it needs a fair bit of inputs compared to some of our other grasses. So if it has a poor soil, it will struggle. Now with Kentucky bluegrass, there's over between 100 and 200 varieties that you can buy probably. And so some of them are going to do better in certain kinds of soils than others, but by and large you want to have as good a soil as possible, and compaction is the real big thing, so reducing compaction.
Okay, and you spoke to this a little bit, but will overwatering create an unhealthy lawn, and why?
Yeah, so overwatering, like I said before, if you overwater, the roots aren't going to grow very much because they don't need to, right? The water's there. The other thing that can happen is you can create anaerobic conditions in the soil, and that also causes stress to the grass. So yeah, and the other thing that water does is it's often conducive to plant diseases. So you have a lot of soil moisture, you have a lot of heat during the summer, and you're going to get more disease. You're going to see more problems with different lawn diseases. Now with a home lawn, you're going to get diseases, and you're not going to probably treat them, but it's still going to be something that's going to decline the quality of the turf, and sometimes you can lose some grass from some of the turf diseases that are common in Minnesota.
Okay, that's all I have in my hands. But
We can take a few questions from the floor. Are there any questions from the floor?
What would you recommend for areas of the lawn where sometimes there's a slope, a hill, and other areas above the line, and it's hard to moisturize the hill because it runs off.
So the
And then you have probably excess water.
So what the question, let me repeat the question because it's being videotaped and that may not have caught that. So the question is, how do you address a sloped area that goes into a shallow area, different heights of your lawn? How do you address that?
Yeah, so I think what we're trying to get at here is, you've got a lawn with different moisture needs, really, right? And that's one of the reasons we often mix species together. So like with the example I gave you of tall fescue and Kentucky bluegrass, in the dry sloped areas, the tall fescue is going to predominate, right? So let's say you start off with 50-50 plants. I told you a ratio of 90% tall fescue to 10% bluegrass by weight, but that's about half and half because the seed size is different. So let's start with 50% of each. Well, in those sloped areas, sunny sloped areas, it's hotter and a little bit drier, that tall fescue is going to do well and kind of push out the Kentucky bluegrass. In those lower areas, the Kentucky bluegrass will probably push out the tall fescue. And one of the problems with tall fescue too is ice cover during the winter. It doesn't really like ice, so there might be a little ice cover in those lower areas right during the winter. So if you mix, it's really important you don't just plant the same thing like the whole lawn, because there's like these microclimates where some grasses are going to do better than others. So if you can have a little diversity in the species and cultivars you use, that's going to help you out.
Okay.
Also on slopes like that, you want to raise the mowing height too, to reduce the stress, kind of like we talked about before, for general drought maintenance.
Okay, good question. Any others from the floor? Yes.
What's the best way to measure against your 1 inch?
What's the best way to measure for a 1 inch or for your
Oh, for
lawn?
water?
Yeah.
I've heard, big cans and other things.
Yeah, those are all options, right? So if you look at the how to audit resource at the University Extension site, they use tuna cans. Yeah, you can do things like that. So when you're auditing your system, you can determine what the rate is that your system's putting out, right? Because you'll have time and you'll have amount, and then you can calculate that way.
Is there any correlation between depth of roots based on either how long your grass is or on how short you mow it?
So is there a correlation between the height of your grass and the root of your grass?
Yes, absolutely. So research shows as you raise mowing height, you typically get a little deeper root system. And inversely, of course, as you lower the mowing height, you're going to lose a little bit of that rooting depth. So it's another reason. It's more stress tolerant the higher it is. Now you don't want to go too crazy because you want that grass to spread and tiller out. And if you're not mowing, it's not going to get that horizontal growth that kind of fills in a lawn and gives us a good turf.
What about mulching versus picking up the grass?
So what about mulching versus picking up the grass?
So you should always return your clippings. There'd be rare cases, like if you left your grass to grow a long time, you're on vacation or whatever, and you didn't mow for a long time, you had just amounts of clippings that were just layering on top of the grass, then you'd want to remove them. But as general practice, when you're doing your typical mowing, you always want to return them. It returns a lot of nutrients to the lawn, so that's always best practice to return your clippings.
Does that help for water retention as well?
Does it help for water retention? It helps build organic matter a little bit, which is good for, it's probably a slight benefit. The biggest benefit though is that you're getting that fertilizer return.
Yes.
So I live in a new neighborhood, Woodland Cove, basically no topsoil, all clay, and just wondering what's the best way to fix that?
What's the best way to fix the hard clay soil?
Yeah, so new developments are often a problem. You get very excited about the new house, and you forget about what's under the grass, right? But developers do this often, right? And it kind of shows itself later. Like it might not be evident right away that there's a problem. How can you correct it? So aerification is a good practice in a place like that. So usually compaction is a big problem. So if you can aerify in the fall, usually in the fall would be a good time to aerify. That'll help break some of that up. In a severe case, if you wanted to start to add some material to your soil, you would top dress after that aerification. That's probably a rare case, but if you had a really severe problem where the soil is just really bad situation. That's how you, like on a golf course or something, that's what they would do. They would aerify and then top dress new material that would slowly work its way into the soil. And then over time, you do that every year. And then over time, you would start to see some change. Another thing that you can do sometimes on poor soils is use different grass. So maybe you've got Kentucky bluegrass on a really poor soil that's not doing well. Something like tall fescue might have a better chance.
Right. Well, I think in our city bylaws, they even suggested Kentucky bluegrass. So it's kind of surprising, given lack of water, that they would suggest using Kentucky bluegrass.
Thank you.
It's interesting.
We had another question over here.
I'm just wondering, at what point in the spring would you say you can guesstimate a lawn's health from recovery after a summer like we had?
So when can we expect to know if our lawns have recovered? At what point this spring?
Yeah, so you're saying you went into winter, not great. Now you want to know if it's a little better.
Real bad.
Yeah, so if you have Kentucky bluegrass or fine fescues, you'd start to, the next week or so you should know. Tall fescue takes a little longer to green up. But if you go out there, let's say Monday, Tuesday, after this nice weekend coming up, especially in sunny areas, if you go out there on Monday, Tuesday and it still looks really bad, you probably got problems you have to deal with. Maybe you had some grub damage in the fall. I've seen quite a bit of grub damage this year around, in addition to drought issues. But if it's not greening up by, this time next week, I think that might be cause for concern.
Do you have any other questions?
Speaking of grub treatment, at the end of the season or at the beginning of the season?
So the question was about grub treatment, beginning of the season or end of season. So if you're gonna treat for grubs, and I think we're gonna see more need for that, unfortunately. So there's nobody's developed a grass that's resistant to grub treating. And actually, the grubs are not necessarily killing your grass. They're kind of cutting off the roots, but there's still root material there. What the problem with grubs is that things come to eat the grubs. And those things, skunks and crows, they come and tear up their lawn. So the grubs, what happens is, let's use Japanese beetles as an example. So the adults are flying around during the summer, they lay eggs. Those eggs get laid in the grass, and the eggs hatch, become larvae, and they start to feed. So in the, let's say late August, early September, they're young and they're close to the surface, so they're actually a little easier to kill them with the insecticide. Then what happens is they get bigger as they feed, they go deeper in the soil, and they overwinter deep in the soil, and in the spring they start coming up, and now they're bigger and they're deeper, so it's a little tougher to get out. You can apply either way, right? So if you had a lot of damage last year and you want to get rid of them, the spring application is gonna still help you. Because if you don't treat and you have big populations, and we had a winter that probably didn't kill many grubs because we had plenty of snow. If you have that situation, you probably want to apply even though fall's a little better, right? So if you're picking between the two, late summer, early fall is a little easier to kill the grub. However, if you got a problem, you got a problem, right? So then
You do it both times.
you can do it both times, right? And you want to make sure that when you're applying insecticides like that, you're only doing it when you know for sure you got a problem. And you can dig down there and see if you've got grubs, right? You can look and see, and you can look online and find the threshold. So many per square feet is a problem. Below that's not really a concern. So you can have some grubs, and it's not a problem for your turf, but there's a threshold at which it becomes a problem. You can look that information up online.
Other questions of the professor? Otherwise, okay. Thank you very much,
Thanks.
Professor Watkins. So as you can see here, there's 3 ovals that are being represented. And what do they mean? Obviously, the city of Minnetrista, that includes the city council and city staff. Minnetrista residents are another oval in this picture, and then the Minnesota DNR. So what does this mean? These 3 entities are part of the equation, and these 3 entities are part of the solution. No one entity can be the solution in and of itself, not even 2 entities. These 3 entities need to work together in order to create what I would say is in order to create the best outcome for Minnetrista. So with that, as we go through these slides, you will see the primary responsibility party or parties, and they will be on the top. And those will be, so sometimes it's going to be the city, sometimes it's going to be residents, sometimes the DNR, and sometimes more than one. And we're just doing this so that you can see that this needs to be an effort by everybody in the community, by the DNR, and the city of Minnetrista. These are the 3 primary players in this equation. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Allison.
Mayor, appreciate everyone coming out. So we just wanted to go a quick overview of what the city infrastructure looks like for water. So we have, in Minnetrista, we have a north system and a south system, so they're separated. North system kind of up in the northeast portion, but the bulk of Minnetrista is on the south system, about 77% of users. We have 5 wells in the south system, 2 of which are considered backup wells due to water quality. With those 2 wells, we have the 2 water towers and then the 1 water treatment plant. And as the mayor mentioned, we're currently underway looking for 2 new well sites and another water treatment site. So when we look at water supply, there's a lot of components that go into how the water gets from the ground in Minnetrista to users. So when we look at the bottom part, the aquifer, which is a source of water for Minnetrista, as a city, we have to look to the DNR and work with the DNR to establish how much water the city can use, the appropriation. And the reason that's important, the DNR looks at that, is I'm sure folks have if you don't know intimate details, but are aware of the White Bear Lake water issue, the DNR is responsible for looking at statewide the water allocations and ensuring from, in this case, the metro area, when we look at our groundwater sources, that there's enough water for all the different communities. And so they established this appropriation amount or a certain volume of water for the city to use. The water from the aquifer is pumped up through a well, and when we look at wells, we look at the number of wells and types based on how much demand there is from the users in the system, maximum day water demands. And then we also take a look at the water treatment, which is again the max water demands, average demands, so that we can get treated water to the residents. And the water in Minnetrista is treated for iron and manganese typically. And then there's at certain well sites they can have chlorine injection, but Minnetrista treats their water. The water towers are used for storage. So there's a few components that go into the size of them, the location of them. We look at the maximum demands to make sure that in normal circumstances we are holding enough water to meet the needs of the community. And then we also look at how much water we can pump if one of our wells is out of service. So we do have some redundancy and some backup in the system when we look at sizing the water tower. And then we also look at the amount needed to fight a fire. Our priority is always the health, safety, and welfare of residents. So with these components like the water tower, the water treatment, we want to make sure that the water that you use to cook, clean, drink is safe. We don't size the system for drought conditions. It's the DNR permitting aside. That's a very large system. That's very expensive, and especially in the winter months, we do have to look at having a certain amount of water turned over in the system. Otherwise, it starts to go stagnant. So so it's a bit of a balancing act. So that's why we don't size systems for these extreme drought conditions. So another component that we look at with our wells and with our water treatment is we do have the options of, as I mentioned, we have two wells that are not the greatest quality, and we can pump those wells into the water system untreated. Still safe. When I say untreated, it means it doesn't go through the water treatment plant. They're still safe for consumption, but there's aesthetic concerns with that. So if we mix that well water with the treated water, we get a lot of water complaints with that. And when we looked at the initial system, the existing water treatment plants, with Minnetrista being a developing area, it's about a 5 to 10 year lifespan on that. There was a few different engineering firms that looked at the sizing of that. So, it wasn't just a quick guess. There was certainly a lot of engineering that went into sizing on those. Next slide, please. So this is a graphic some of you may have seen in one of the mailers that went out. When we look at the water tower on Kings Point Road, we have a full condition at 38 feet. At 22 to 23 feet is where we're considered for adequate fire suppression. Anything below that, we're at risk of not having enough to fight a fire. And then at 10 feet, it's a drinking water advisory. And the reason is you can imagine it's the higher the water, the more it's pushing down through the system. If we only have 10 feet of water, less than 10 feet of water in that system, the pressures aren't high enough to keep the bacteria from growing within the system. And so we have to be very cognizant of that. So if you go to the next slide, it's not the prettiest graphic, but it was the best that I could come up with to try to illustrate what happened in June of 2021. So the dots represent water tower elevations through time in June. And so you can see we started off that we were in that green area about 8 times in 17 days. We were above that fire protection level. But then you can see 9 days we were below that fire protection level. And the wells weren't able to keep up with the demands. The water treatment plant wasn't able to keep up with demand. And you can see we got to levels that were very close to that boil water order. And that's where we came to the point where there was the watering restrictions and the watering bans put in place. So wanted to do an explanation of that for the infrastructure.
This graph here is really a really good graph and way to see what was happening. A lot of people say, well, we don't have enough water. We have enough water, and we have enough water to bring quality, treated, filtered water to your home. What we don't have is we don't have enough water for excessive sprinkling of your yards. So that's what I wanted to show. That's what we're showing here. You can see in January, February, March, April, May, we had sufficient water. This green line here, that's the goal that the DNR has recommended. It's called a peaking factor. So when we design our systems, we design it based on the average daily use, plus then we add in an additional 2.6 times for irrigation. And that's the peaking factor. Usually you're going to hit your peaking factor sometime, you're going to get close, and you're going to be there sometime in the summer with a lot of irrigation going on. I also want you to take a look over here on the side. The DNR goal is the 2.6 peaking factor. Minnetrista was at 3.1. That's a lot higher. Now that doesn't sound like a lot when you just say, well, that's only, 0.5. But the thing is it's a lot of gallons. Then when you look at other communities, their peaking factors, none of them were close to Minnetrista's. Because I know that there was a lot of questions about why didn't other communities have sprinkling bans? Well, when you look at their peaking factors, Victoria, very similar to Minnetrista, lots of new growth. Their peaking factor is only 2.8. Mounds, only 2.0. Orono's 2.6. St. Bonnie, 2.2. If we had been in those peaking factor numbers, we probably would have had restrictions, but not an all-out ban. And that's why we think it's crucial to educate our users on how to have green lawns without over-watering. So that's what we're trying to achieve, is we're trying to stay behind that green line of 2.6. I think there's let's go to the next one. Well, so what is the city doing and how are we addressing this? Of course, the number one issue is we want to educate our residents, not just so that you use less water because of our system, but actually, when you use less water, you save money. So there's more money in your pocket to do other things with. And a lot of people, when they overwater, they're basically putting money down the drain. So that's the other reason we're trying to educate people on best practices for lawn care and irrigating. So we are expanding our water infrastructure. We currently have our new water tower online. It's a 500,000 gallon water tower that's online now. That should help as well this summer. We have more storage capacity. The other thing that we've done is we've implemented a new ordinance for stormwater ponds. They will be the one and only source of irrigation for new developments. Some developments or some phases in Woodland Cove already have that in place, and new ones coming online will continue to have that. So what happens is they're going to be using the stormwater ponds for irrigation, and when those stormwater ponds are emptied, if you will, they will also have a backup well, and the backup wells that they have are not going to be nearly as deep. They're going to be in a drift aquifer versus in the deep aquifers that the city's wells are in. But they will then replenish those ponds so that people will be able to irrigate throughout the summer months. Again, there's probably going to still be a capacity on that. But so we've developed that, and there's actually now an ordinance in place that when a new development comes online, anything over 5 units for the development, they will have to be implementing the stormwater pond irrigation system. The water education and conservation efforts will continue. So we will continue to try and educate people on how to conserve on water, but also saving you money. And the other thing is that we are refining, and we have refined now our water restriction policy. Right now, it's odd even. So if your house number is odd, you can water on odd numbered days. If your house number is even, you can water on even numbered days. Those hours are going to be from 6 p.m. at night until 10 a.m. in the morning. If we have to implement our second phase, what will happen is you will have 2 days on which you can water during the summer months. And as you heard the professor, usually if you have a healthy lawn, 2 days of watering a week should be sufficient. So that will be the same odd number of homes will be able to water on Sunday and on Thursdays. Even numbered homes will be able to water on Wednesdays and Saturdays. And then the hours would be the same from 6 p.m. until 10 a.m. So those are some of the things we've set in place. We've also updated our ordinances for soil requirements and also when new sod and seed can be laid as well. And those will all be those will all help our system be a little more user-friendly for existing water users. Let me see if there's anything else that we missed. I know the DNR was supposed to be here this evening, and unfortunately they were not. So a couple of things I just want to reiterate as Ms. Fescue mentioned. The city, I know people think that we have an infinite amount of water resources because we live in Minnesota. We do not. We have a finite water resource, and those are our aquifers. So when we talk about different waters, there's 2 different water types. There's groundwater, and then there's surface water. Our groundwater is the water underneath the ground. Those are our aquifers. That's where we get our Minnetrista, that's where we get our water. We don't get water for drinking and home use out of our surface water. Surface water is stormwater ponds, lakes, and streams. If we had to resort to that, then you're talking an extremely expensive system that the city would have to implement and have to build in order to treat those kind of waters. It's called reverse osmosis. So those kind of systems is what we want to avoid. There's also state statutes that dictate how much water can be pumped out of the aquifers. And that's why the DNR gives every city an allocation of water. In other words, our city can only pump 223 million gallons a year. I'm looking to Gary, and he says, yes, that's correct. We can pump up to 223 million gallons a year. That is what they have allocated to us. The reason they allocate a certain amount is because they have to look at all of the communities that are tapped into the same aquifers that we are in. And they have to say, okay, by state statute, we cannot lower that aquifer. What happens is when it rains and those waters go into the ground, eventually they end up into the aquifers. But if we drain that aquifer faster than what it's being replenished, we're going to be in a world of hurt. So we want to make sure that we have plenty of good quality water to bring to your homes and for you to use.
Can I just ask one question about?
Yeah, we're going to get.
DNR requirements?
Okay, hold on, Steve, just a second. I just want to make sure. Anything else? Because what I'll do, Steve, ask that question right now.
Okay, so we have 223 million gallons a year. Is that based on geographic area, number of residents, or do they roll the dice and use chicken bones to figure?
They roll the dice and use chicken bones. No, I'm just kidding. No, they do not. No, there is a certain amount. For instance, St. Bonnie, which is a much smaller community, their allocation is 103 million a year. So it's based on your average water use, and it's also based on your population as how many users are on the water system. So, Greg, is that correct?
That's correct, and it's based on the aquifer too.
Okay, thank you. So there's a lot of numbers and calculations that go into that, but it's just not a roll of the dice. So right now we're looking at drilling into 2 different aquifers for our 2 new wells. One is the Mount Simon Aquifer, which is highly restricted, and we're very, very fortunate that we think we will be able to drill a permanent well into that aquifer because of all of the things that we're doing here. We're doing education, we're doing these town hall meetings, we're trying to inform people about the water usage and so on. That's one of the requirements that the DNR has of communities when you drill new wells. The other the other aquifer that we're going into is the Tunnel City Wanawak. We have several aquifers in that wells in that aquifer currently. The 2 wells that we currently have that provide water to our southern water treatment are in that aquifer. And then we have a couple other wells. One is already in the Mount Simon. It's not a very good location and it's not a very good well. And the reason the DNR is looking at us saying, yes, we think we'll allow you to go into this Mount Simon is simply because we said, look, we would like to have a new Mount Simon well, and in return we will remove the one that we have. So we're working with the DNR to try and get the best quality water and also the quantity that we need. So let's go to Allie and she can ask us some questions, and then again we'll open it up to the floor.
Okay. Are there established requirements for adequate water pressure? Does water supply affect water pressure delivered to individual homes?
I don't know. Let's see. Either Allie or...
That's a great question. So when we look at designing a system, we look at 10 state standards, which is a guiding document for, which includes pressure to the home. And we're usually around 60 PSI, 50 to 60 PSI is what our optimum pressure delivery at the home is. Once we start getting a little bit higher, then we certainly have to look at pressure reducers. Anything lower, we have, we certainly don't want to be in that because we have fire hydrants as well that we want to keep at that pressure.
Okay.
Thank you.
What are residents supposed to do with a half-alive, half-dead grass after last summer when others were allowed to water their grass?
So what we've done is we've revisited, and so this was brought up, particularly people in, I'll say Woodland Cove, because you weren't allowed to use your irrigation systems, and yet your neighbor was allowed to water. And it was brought to the city council's attention. As soon as we kind of realized what was going on, we said, yeah, we need to make some changes. And so right now we've implemented a different strategy. In other words, you are not, if we're into a phase 2 watering restriction, you will not be allowed to put in new sod or new seed. Is that?
That didn't answer the question.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Answer my question. What are we gonna do now? What am I supposed to do now with a half dead? Because he said Monday. So Monday, when I wait and it's still half dead, what am I supposed to do?
I think you'd have to follow some of the recommendations that he made.
I live with a lawn care professional and a firefighter. So now what do I do? And I've gotten quotes to replace my grass, and it's $10,000.
And what I would suggest is that you talk to your builder, because if they didn't put in the right grass or they didn't put in the right soil, that's part of the problem. Because the city, so when we go out, I know people have said, why didn't you inspect? What the city inspects for is health and safety issues. We don't inspect for landscaping. That is not the city's responsibility, nor do we inspect for that. So when we have the ordinance in place, which we did back then, that you have to have six inches of soil before you put down sod, we don't inspect for those 6 inches because it's not a health and safety issue. However, we've refined that, and knowing that, we are asking all of the builders to do that. But ultimately, it is the builder's responsibility and the homeowner's responsibility to make sure that they're following the ordinances that are in place.
So it's buyer beware.
Well, yeah,
That's too bad.
yeah. Okay, hold on just a second.
It's kind of a follow-up to that.
Okay, all right.
And actually, I wrote it down, but it's on for me. What can the city do to help us as homeowners that belong to these associations? I pleaded with them last year to cut my grass at 4 inches plus. I pleaded with them to get onto a better rotation. And they just said, well, there's no city ordinance. Can you help? Put the leverage on them for exactly what we saw here. For 30 years, I had a house and I had barely water. I was at 4.5 inches. It was green, it was lush all year long.
So I'm not sure if I don't know, I don't know the answer to that, but Jasper, do you know, can we set an ordinance as to how long the grass is
I
mowed?
don't know about the length, but just some sort of influence with the association from a city perspective to assist us in being better conservators of our environment.
Okay, and that's a
Does that
good,
make sense?
that's a good point, okay?
Yeah. So I'm Jasper. But, I think everybody now knows me.
Hi, Jasper.
Hi. So do you live in like in a townhome association where somebody?
Yeah, I'm over at Woodland.
Okay, yeah. So if you live there and your association, so your HOA, you likely have an HOA board.
Yep.
They hire a landscaping company to come in periodically. I would say I would go go to your HOA board and have them work with that vendor.
I have tried.
Okay. Is the board functioning? Is it active?
It is, but
Okay.
it doesn't feel compelled.
Okay.
Is that a nice way of saying that?
Sure.
Thank you. It
Yeah.
doesn't feel compelled to, they're trying to take the easy route, but, cutting the grass longer is not easy because their contract says mow every week.
Yeah.
Well, that's stupid, especially in the drought. That
Exactly.
was just stupid.
Yep. Yeah. So long story short, the city can't determine what your landscaping company does or your lawn mowing company does.
Exactly.
It would have to be the board. You'd have to engage your board and ask them to do that. I'm part of I live in an HOA too. We ran into the same situation. We were able to work with the contractor to reduce the amount of times they're mowing because of the drought, because it just didn't need it. First of all, yeah. So I would say continue to work with your board. I don't know if there's any board seat elections up, they have the control, on the board, they have the control to work with those vendors and get the schedule changed.
Yeah, because, we had police officers, and I appreciate them coming by and saying, why are you watering?
Yeah.
And just, the association has control of my water. I can't, I'm obliged not to touch it. I would just, I'm looking for you guys, and one of the reasons I'm here is to help compel the associations to be more aware and just not, do things because it's 1 week and it's time to mow. It's just stupid.
And, again, trying to educate the builders, but after they're gone, after they've,
It's the association.
then it's the association. Maybe sending out information to the association president or something like that, and encouraging them and telling them what could potentially happen if they don't follow the good practices might be an idea. So what I would suggest, maybe just providing the association contact information would be a good idea too.
Yeah. One other thing that Gary actually brought up is there's usually a management company that the association works with. You could reach out directly to them, let them know your concerns. They would then, they convey that information to the board, and they can maybe even make that adjustment. If that's the case, if the board is not active and not following through on some of those changes, you can go right to the management company.
Thank you, man, for letting me try.
One thing I just want to say on that too, ask for a copy of your contract and see if you're a per time, per month, what it is. I mean, because if they're paying per time, that's why they're out there trying to make as much money as they can. But maybe, hey, let's switch to this where we can do it a monthly or whatever it is, instead of having them, on a set schedule. But talk to them and look at it and what's the best plan for you guys as an association. How many times you want them to mow, during a drought. Hey, most of your associations are gonna be paying per month no matter what. So they're gonna get paid. So, I mean, if they're coming out to mow when it's a drought, they're wasting their money. Because most times when I was running a private company, we had contracts set with huge homeowner associations on a per month basis. So if we came out one time, we get the same amount. We came out 10 times, we got the same amount. So in this case, I'm sure it's probably the same thing you guys have set up, same with your snow removal and all that. So it's one thing to make sure that your contract with your homeowner association has with them is covering that.
And that's,
Right.
it's almost like you're mimicking, that's exactly what they had told me, is that it's an annual contract already signed, they're into it, and
Right.
to them, it just seemed like too much trouble to do the right thing.
So like I said, give us the contact information, at least we can send them the information. That's about it.
That's all
But,
I can ask, thank
yeah,
you.
thank you. Ally?
Mm-hmm. What went wrong? How could a community surrounded by water not have enough water?
Well, Yes, and that's, that's kind of an anomaly when you think about it. Land of 10,000 lakes. So again, the water that we provide you with, other than the stormwater pond irrigation homes, you are using, if you recall can you put that up?
Which
The well and how the structure, there you go. So we pump it out of the ground, so it's not groundwater, it's not surface water that we're using for, especially for your irrigation. We're actually pumping it out of, it's going into our treatment plant, so it's being filtered and treated, then it's going into the tower, and then it's going to your house, and then from your house it goes out into your yard for irrigation. So think about it. If everybody used the stormwater ponds, that would be really good, because number one, you're actually using very expensive, if you will, treated filtered water on your grass, and you don't need to. So that's why we've changed to go to the stormwater pond irrigation system. And that's why, and this is the aquifers that I was talking about that are regulated, and by state statute, the aquifers cannot be lowered than what they currently are, and so the DNR monitors those and tells us what we can take out of those. And that's why we don't have an infinite amount of water. That's why it's finite. And so I don't know if that answers the question or not. Yes?
I'm wondering, with the watering, you said that we had the days that we were above the other communities around us was 3.1. And other communities around us had a watering restriction, not a ban. So how do we, with a watering ban, how are we using that much water? Where is the gaping hole?
You want to go back to that shower hose or that hose again?
Yes.
Okay. You see, this is what we were using in June before we had the ban on. Then we took the ban off for a short while, and you can see how it escalated again. And then we went back to the watering ban, and then in August, we took it off again. So it doesn't give you a clear picture as to how much was used before the ban.
No, but like with 26 million gallons in August, when we were under the watering ban.
So
you weren't.
Yeah.
That's last year. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, ma'am, let's, hold on. Remember, rule number 1, we're going to be respectful, okay? Just please, we're going to try and answer your question.
Sure.
Ms.
So
Belsky?
just to clarify, so the graphic here shows the Minnetrista's average water usage from 2017 to 2021. So this is not the just 2021 on its own. We feel that this is a better representation of the average usage that we see in Minnetrista, so that it's not just the anomaly of a drought year. This is something that's been happening for years prior. It was the drought condition that really exacerbated it.
So in 2021, this graph would have been far greater than what you're seeing today, if that makes sense. Okay, so this is an average. So in other years, we didn't exceed this, or this is what the average is. But last year, this graph would have been far over what you're seeing here.
Mayor Whalen,
Just a second.
I can gather the data for you, but even in 2021, it was actually 3.3, not 3.1. That was the
Right.
average.
Yeah.
Thanks for the original question, which is a great question in that our peak is 3.1 and 3.3, but we're on the watering ban or restriction. Does somebody have something on that should be on, that's draining all this water?
Could be.
And it's substantial.
Yeah. So, for instance, you're correct, not everybody adhered to the watering ban, but even so, with the watering ban, it did reduce it, okay? But not everybody adhered to it. Plus, if you recall, some people with new sod and seed were still allowed to water before we stopped that practice. So that also added to that. The other thing is, at the beginning of June, we were still watering was still allowed. Then it was stopped, and then we said, well, we'll allow we did, I think, a 2-day watering implementation, and then that's when the tank was lowered, was drained overnight almost, again, and we said, well, we can't have that as well. So it kind of fluctuated, if you will. Does that?
Madam Mayor, if I may, let me give you a synopsis of what happens here. For us as Public Works, what we see, and this happens everywhere, we call it the S's in the morning. The shampoo, the shower, the soap. So between 6 and 9 is what we call our rush time. So that's when everybody's getting ready for work, getting ready to go. In the evenings, we call it the C time, which is the cooking and the cleaning. So you have everybody between that 4 to 7 doing all this stuff. What we saw during the drought period, and I can demonstrate this on our SCADA system, which watches this, our towers from midnight to 5 a.m., we dropped 20 some feet of water at night, which is irrigation systems. So, I mean, just point blank, I'm sorry, I'll be the bearer of bad news. It was irrigation that was being run by people that didn't care about the ban. I'm gonna be honest. So I mean, as we sit here, I get phone calls, angry phone calls because of this, but we're not the ones that are out there. We can't patrol everybody, but it was irrigation. I will say that. I mean, point blank, it was.
So if it is irrigation, why do we need more water than everybody else?
That's a good question. I think that's something you folks need to answer to us.
Well, I think it has something to do with soil composition and what you've allowed to happen over there. If we're using more water than everyone else, right?
Not
And everyone can
necessarily.
point the finger at irrigation, how come we have to irrigate more?
You don't have to irrigate more. I think people think they have to irrigate more.
So
I think there's a perception out there. I think that's part of the problem. Yeah.
Well, part of the problem is also 2,500 more buildings.
Yeah.
That you don't have the infrastructure for.
We do have the infrastructure
No,
for it.
obviously not, because if you had the infrastructure, you would have water.
Well, do you want to answer that?
So as I mentioned, when we look at sizing the system, we do incorporate those peak demands of irrigation. In the instance of last year, the system isn't designed for an extreme drought. When we look at water tower elevations draining 20 feet overnight, that isn't something that we design our water system for. Other communities, I can speak from experience from the city of Chanhassen. I used to work there, and they had an issue with a lot of watering, with some municipal wells, and they had a very extensive watering campaign. And I don't know so when I look at Chanhassen at 2.4, I don't think they've always been at 2.4. I don't know what some of these other communities are doing. So there are a variety of factors that lay into it. I don't know that you can say it's solely, soil composition. Is it part that? Is it part habits? Someone comes in and sets up your irrigation system when you purchase a new home, or you pay somebody to take care of your lawn, and you don't, you don't think to go and look at it, and it might be overwatering. I think there are a lot of components that we want to look at. And so one of the things when we looked at this town hall was to identify, it wasn't just one thing. We didn't want to just look at irrigation. We did look at other things. When we look at home buildings in new developments, as the mayor mentioned, since Woodland Cove 3rd edition, if I remember correctly, so the last 4 phases of Woodland Cove have been on a stormwater reuse system for their irrigation. So when we look at new home buildings and those new lawns, the sod that requires quite a bit of water at first to establish, they're drawing from a different system. They're not drawing from the treated water system. So those are all components when we look at the whole system.
So those go to private residences, or is that just for the community?
It's for the homes within the development.
That's for all the homes?
Within that phase. Correct. Your phase was predated that.
Yeah.
So it was the southern part, the newer portions of that development that you see now, they're on a water reuse system for irrigation. Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
This gentleman here had a question.
I think you answered it. I just wanted to make sure that the new ordinance see that on the stormwater drainage ponds and then the requirements for soils, that those are applying to all the new houses we're seeing built in Woodland Cove now.
Correct, except if some of the phases that had been previously approved prior to this ordinance being in place, if some of those phases still have lots available, those homes are probably not going to be on the stormwater. But all the new phases, as well as phases, I think, in the past 2 or 3 years that have come in, have that stormwater pond requirement or
So I
stormwater.
think it's phase 4 is the giant development that you see on Highway 7. Is that correct?
Gosh, it kind of jigsaws in there, but yeah, the fourth edition, it started with the third edition, so the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh.
So the third edition on has to use the stormwater drainage ponds for irrigation.
That was, can I clarify that, Madam Mayor?
Yeah.
So the question was that they had to. It wasn't the city ordinance. In this instance, it had to do with the watershed district permitting, and that's what started them to use the stormwater reuse system. And then now the city has gone ahead and adopted that. So any new development, regardless of watershed district requirements, anything 5 or more lots would need to use stormwater reuse. Good question.
Yeah.
So, yeah, just to clarify, because I know the new water tower is in, but I was just concerned that there wasn't going to be enough capacity for the irrigation of all the new homes we're seeing built along Highway 7 and then where Lotus used to be.
And those are,
So those all have to be watered from the ponds.
That's correct.
They've got at least 4 foot
Yeah.
right.
I've noticed tons of ponds, I just wanted to make sure that they were required to draw from them.
Correct.
Oh, yeah.
But when you look at this watering, you can see there's still plenty of capacity in here to deliver quality filtered treated water to your home. It's when we get into that excessive irrigation that we run into problems. And I think a couple things that will happen this summer. Hopefully, we won't have a drought like last summer. But the other thing is, as you mentioned, we have the new water tower online. That'll give us additional storage capacity. The other thing that we're working on and have fixed at this point is our water treatment facility wasn't running at 100%. We didn't know that because we never had to push it to run at that capacity. Once we found out that it wasn't running or operating at 100%, we started making changes, and it's now running at like 99.9%. So it's increased the output significantly. So that, along with the water tower online, those two things will help a lot. And the other thing that we're doing is we're just in high-level talks right now with St. Bonnie to see what the opportunities might be to purchase some water from them. And so that might also be of help now and in the future. So hold on just a second. Are there other questions? We're going to take a couple more questions from here, and then we'll move it back to the floor again.
Sure. Can we add any water treatment to reduce water hardness?
I think our water treatment plants, and maybe Greg Johnson could answer that better, treats for manganese and iron. I don't think it treats for softness.
Yeah, that's correct. For softening, it's either, if you look at like Minneapolis or St. Paul, they go through a lime softening process too, and that's a much more advanced system. And when you go with that type of system, you're probably doubling the cost of your water plant at least. So then that affects water rates. And but with that being said, I mean, you can do lime softening, you're going to discharge those chlorides to your wastewater too. So there are some advantages to that, but it's a very expensive treatment process to do softening.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to combine a few here. Why was the city not drilling for wells 3 to 4 years ago when you had already approved the land sales to developers? And is there a time frame for building/digging the wells in towers?
So time frame, we're already starting on the 2 new wells. The water tower is already up. We are not planning on any more water towers in the near future. The treatment plant, we're hoping, again, depending on the wells, if they are productive wells that we can actually do permanent wells, then we will be looking at a treatment plant kind of simultaneously with those wells. It will take between 2 and 3 years before that third treatment plant on the southern system is up and running. So with that, the other part of the question? I'm sorry.
It was, why was the city not drilling for wells 3 to 4 years ago after approval of developments?
Yeah, the developments that were approved, we had sufficient water for the developments. Again, I want to point to this, and I want to tell you, it is irrigation that is the issue. And the plan, and we had a 10-year plan in place, and we knew we'd have to be looking at another treatment plant and more wells within 5 to 10 years, and we are at that 5-year point, and we have been working on it for the past year, approximately past year.
How many gallons of water did we pump in 2021 versus that 223 million?
Gary, do you know, 220 million? Was it?
I think we were slightly over because we had to pay a surcharge to the DNR. I'm not exactly sure, but I know we were slightly over. We had Greg actually talked to the DNR for us that time, and I didn't recall what it was, Greg, it was quite a bit over.
It was, I don't remember the exact volume, but it was.
But it was a one-time deal, so I mean, they kind of
Yeah.
gave us the, okay, we understand and stuff, so. But
We explained it to the DNR
in a normal year, we're probably pushing 180 to maybe 190 max, on a normal year, so, I mean, there's a lot more development coming in, so yeah, we are seeing a lot more water usage, but I mean, we are within our, allotments, so.
So we're concerned we're gonna hit that cap?
Well, so what will happen is, again, every year you have to file a water report with the DNR, and then based on our population and growth, they will make those adjustments. Greg, do you want to speak to that?
That's correct. It's, over time, as your population increases, you have to amend your appropriation permit to the DNR, and that's the time where, you state the reasons for your water increases.
Right.
And in most cases, the DNR will do an amendment, but it depends on which part of the, say right now, like up in White Bear Lake, they're not amending any permits right now. But they do consider development in those permits.
When I started, it was 151 million gallons, just to give you a reference, that's 10 years ago. So now we're at 223 million.
So they will amend it. So I'm going to ask this gentleman here.
Suggestion, just from a draft standpoint, I think this will answer one of the questions back there. Just how much of an outlier 2021 was. That
Right.
really doesn't show it very well.
Right.
The way that I would suggest, show 2017 to 2020 for those 4 years,
And then
break out
Sure.
a separate for those
Sure.
high points what it was last year. Because that's what will really show last year's impact.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. Thank you.
Just to expand on that, I do have the salt system water demands from 2021, and in the month of June, just the salt system did 27.4 million gallons. So if you look at these numbers up here, that's actually the north and the salt system combined.
Yeah.
So we did almost as much as
As-
the average
Uh-huh.
for those 4 years.
But this varies it.
Yes. Yeah.
Correct.
Right.
It dilutes it down over time.
Right.
You want to show the thumb that got hit by the nail.
All right. Hold on just a second.
Good point.
Another question, real quick?
Yeah, we've been talking, which is really helpful, about the residential consumption.
Mm-hmm.
There's talk about commercial development, especially around the King Point area.
Mm-hmm.
Is that for real? And if so, how does that affect everything that we've talked about? Because if we do put commercial there, there's going to be a huge consumer.
It depends on what type of commercial. Commercial doesn't always use a lot more than residential, but that is something we'll be looking at. And for sure, whatever goes in there, they would have to be required to not do irrigation with city water, for sure. That's one thing. But we'll be looking at that.
But everything that we've been talking about is in the context of, residential.
And that's,
in order for
yeah.
us to walk out of here educated, it would be nice to have at least a picture of what the commercial.
We don't have
impact is gonna
anything,
be, because this is all residential.
right. We have, in our community, basically, especially on the southern system, 99.9% of our water is residential use. We have very, do we have any?
Today, what about
Yeah,
in
hold on
the-
just a second. I don't think we have very much at all.
2 businesses.
We have 2 businesses. And then the, around the Kings Point area that you're talking about, we don't even have a plan in front of us yet for commercial. And if commercial were to come in, let's just say it came in tomorrow, it would take about a year and a half to 2 years before they would be online using city water. And like I said, there's things that we're doing today that are going to help us. We're talking with St. Bonnie potentially of buying, again, this is high level, very preliminary. We're talking about with them purchasing water from them, that might be an option, but also because our plant is going to be running more efficient than it was, plus the water tower now being online. Those things are all going to help. And we'll be looking at that commercial use.
I appreciate the documentation that you send out, your pamphlets. I find those interesting.
Okay.
But I'm still seeing the gap.
Okay.
Or, you can't ignore that part of our rate increase.
Okay. Yes.
I'm wondering what the city is doing to educate people who are not in this room and clearly using all the water via irrigation systems.
So we've done a number of things. One, we've sent out, so we can tell who the high water users are. And what we did is we sent out a letter to those high water users, informing them that, basically asking them to reduce their water consumption. That's one of the things we've done. But the other thing is, we've been mailing out to every single water user, every household, we've been mailing these mailers out. So not only have you folks received those, but every single household that's on city water has been receiving those. In addition to that, we have a website, and we've been putting out information on the website. We've been doing Facebook page things on our Facebook page. We're videotaping this so people can watch this and learn. What else?
Do you want to talk about the top tier of the water rates that were implemented?
No, we haven't done that. You want to?
Oh, sure.
Go ahead.
So, as a lot of folks know, the city recently updated the water rate and adjusted the tiers. And so I think that's one component that's really important. When they looked at adjusting the rates, they have 3 tiers, and they increased the usage for that middle tier from 50,000 to 65,000. So there was a lot of thought that went into it. But I think the really important thing to focus on, and to your point in the back with the question about the high users, that 3rd tier, when we look at the volume of water, that is really a financial disincentive to get them to use that much water. That was the significant hike in water rates, and it's for that outlier 3rd tier, very high water user.
So do you think that the problem is coming from those top tier users and only those top tier users?
I think, it's hard to say. It's hard to say, but we do want to disenfranchise people from using that much water. That's why that 3rd tier is so much higher than the other ones. So we're hoping people will take a look at that and say, and also through just knowledge of how to better use water, that they might just say, I don't need to spend this kind of money. Yes.
So I just wanted to commend the city on the quality of the last mailer that went out, because it was very informative in terms of, days to water, how long to have each zone, an explanation on the economic disincentive to waste water. So I thought that was very helpful.
And maybe we should send something like that out again.
Well, I was going to suggest that,
Yeah.
the irrigation systems are going around now, starting this week, starting people's
Right.
systems up again, and people are going to start programming them. It might not be a bad idea to send it again, because I
Right.
thought that was very helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Good.
So the gentleman in the back?
So there's 2 things. First, we have a 10% inflation. Our home values estimates went up 25% this year, and now we are also increasing the cost of water. I did the analysis based on last year's usage, where I obeyed the watering ban, and my previous ladies, my grass is totally dead, several $1,000s of damage, and now increasing the water rate. Does it make sense at this time?
You want to show the water rate for communities, surrounding communities?
And that's the next question to follow up.
Mhm.
To better line up with somebody else, that's the worst argument for any decision ever.
No, I just want to say, Minnetrista, when you say we have high water rates, when you look, you can say that, but there's a couple of things that factor into that. One, our infrastructure. We could not have a water treatment plant, and we could pump water directly into your home just from the wells. And that, we were doing that for many years, but the people on city water were complaining about their water. And they were saying, this is horrible. Now, I don't know if you're on Next Door Neighbor or on any social media, but if you've heard, people from Mound often complain about their water. Why? Because Mound has the same water that we have, except it's not treated. And I want you to look at the slide that we have.
Sorry, I'm trying to find something.
I don't know why you can't see it. But, and I want you to realize that Mound's water rates are higher than ours, and they do not have a treatment facility. So not only are you getting better water, but at a lower rate. So I'm not saying we're doing, but we have to look at our water infrastructure. We have to do a long-term water rate plan, and we say, okay, here's our infrastructure, here's the cost to replace it, here's the cost to run it, what do we need to charge for our water? And so we have done, and we are also doing a new analysis to determine whether or not these rates are appropriate and if we're in line, because we want to make sure that we have enough money to sustain the infrastructure that we have and to replace it when it needs to be replaced.
No, I totally agree. If you argument like that, that's perfectly okay. But to better align with neighboring communities is not the valid argument.
Well, I don't think we're going to align with that.
The mailer says that was effective.
Okay. So we can't find it?
Jasper put something together here.
Okay.
Yeah, if I could, I'll just explain kind of how this worksheet works. I put all the water rates in for all the surrounding communities that we have. You can put in a usage per gallon, so quarterly or monthly, and it shows you what the water rates, what your bill would be in other communities around us. So that's Minnetrista? That's Minnetrista's rate. If you go to the output tab, and you go up to the top, and there's a highlighted cell there. This is for somebody that uses 30,000 gallons a month, which is a lot. It goes through and you can kind of see what the monthly bill would be and quarterly bill, the difference between what that would be in Minnetrista versus another community. You can see in this scenario with a high user, there's 3 communities that the bill would be higher. And this just demonstrates, I wanted to see, because I came in new with these new water rates I just wanted to see where we would fall in different situations based on usage. So the way it generally trends is that the high users are going to be on probably the top 80% tile of the bill. If you would say, I don't know, what does somebody think a normal monthly usage is for their house? What are you using monthly or quarterly? What's your quarterly bill for, let's just say, third quarter? If anybody wants to share.
How about 44,000? I've got mine right.
44,000 a month,
44,000.
or for the quarter?
For the quarter.
Okay, so that's roughly what, 15?
No, that was 2020.
Oh,
Yeah, so if you put in 15,000
Where you want me to put
up in the yellow, that'll be 15,000 a month roughly. I get it's 45. You can kind of see we fall right in the middle. If you go down to the graph, and maybe it'll be zoomed in a little too much, but the graph on the bottom, you can kind of see Minnetrista is, it's kind of jumping around a little bit. Yeah, it gets a little glitchy, but Minnetrista is basically in the middle, probably right, maybe in the, so, that helped me understand that the rates are probably right in the middle of the region. Now, some of those communities, as Mayor Whalen described, don't have water treatment plants. Those water treatment plants then increase your rates, generally, right? So, I would say that from an outsider perspective, before I came in here, that the water rates in Minnetrista were very, very affordable. They would probably really show up on the low end of the spectrum here when comparing them to other cities. So they kind of fell in line with what we see around here from my perspective. But it is a pretty significant hike, for the top tier. The first and second tier, moderate increase. So I don't know. I found this tool useful for kind of figuring out where we were at as a community compared to other communities.
Do we have any other questions on cards?
I have a good one, I think. What is a long-term plan to expand infrastructure to support 2 times the capacity of the south system?
Not sure that it's going to be 2 times, but I think we've pretty much explained what our expansion and infrastructure plans are. within the next 2 to 3 years. And then that should be good for about a 10-year span. Generally, you plan for 10 years. And you take a look at it every few years as well.
When will the water tower on Kings Point Road be painted?
Well, that's a good question.
Okay, but that one's for you, Gary.
So it's kind of a conundrum because one, we have to take it offline. So obviously we don't want to do it in the summer months. But now that we have the second water tower online, that will help because then we have some redundancy there. But our plan was possibly this year. It's probably not going to happen. But we'll have to take it offline, so we'll have to work out, I'm guessing it'll be sometime like in an August timeframe because they have to drain it. I don't know.
No, it's scheduled for 2023, and it will have to be out of service during the summer because you have to. Yeah, well, it's going to be similar to what we did on the north end. It's going to be a complete drain down, a complete sandblast, repaint, a lot of repairs to be made inside with it. So it has to be done by no later than October 1st. I mean, once it gets too cold, the paint that they use it's a special formulated paint. You cannot go below a certain temperature and it will not adhere. So it'll be offline during the summer, but we will plan for that with the new tower. We should be able to, and with the plant now running at 100%, we should be able to accommodate it.
Yeah. So we're going to take one more and then we're going to close it. Again, are we through with the?
I think I have an important one, maybe.
Okay.
With the new South Water Tower online and the treatment plant improvements to the South Water Treatment Plant, how would the system react to last year's demand?
We don't really know.
So that's my question.
Yeah.
And it's, if we modeled what the improvements have been, the addition of the capacity of the Southwest Tower, the improvements that Gary's team has made to the water treatment facility to get it up to the high 90s in capacity, and then we throw the demand from last year against this new model with twice as much tower capacity, more than twice as much, and the improvements of 25% in the treatment facility, what does that look like? What would last year look like if we had that demand and the new capacity with the tower and the improvements to the water treatment facility?
Let me add one more thing. So that's a good question. Can you go back to those 3 ovals?
To the 3.
A solution to.
This one?
Thank you. If you remember, and that's a good question, Steve, but the solution here isn't only the city of Minnetrista. The solution here is a combination, city, residents, and the DNR. Now, the DNR for watering purposes, in regards to your question, probably doesn't play so much into place. Come into play. But the 2 entities that do come into play for that are the city of Minnetrista and the residents. And I want to make that clear. This has to be a unified effort, not just by the city, but by residents as well. Having said that, we can run those numbers and figure it out. 2 things. 1, I'm hoping we don't have another summer like we did last time. 2, I'm also confident, hopeful, that with the educational pieces and the education that we've done, that people will realize that they don't have to water as much. And then with these improvements, the water treatment plant being now up to 100% and the new water tower, that those will all help. In addition to that, we're still talking with St. Bonnie and potentially getting some water.
Just doing that analysis, and I'd be happy to do it if you give me the data to fill in that green circle.
Right.
But it would, I think, give everybody a lot of comfort because we know it's going to be better.
Right.
The capacities are improved. The result
And we can run
compared
those.
to last year would be a lot better.
Yeah. We can run those numbers. I just want to make it clear that just because we have more capacity doesn't mean people can start watering more. I want to really make it clear. We all need to come to the table here, okay? Because ultimately, guess what? Guess what? All of you are paying for this system. And the sooner we have to update the system, which we're doing right now, we're updating the system 5 years in advance of what we should have to do. Okay? So we're updating it, and guess what? It's going to cost everybody more money now. And so we want to try and prevent that, and we want to try and make sure that we have the capacity. So those things.
Don't use averages, because the growth rate is like this, and averages are always behind the curve.
The growth rate has
That's
been,
to the engineering people.
we've been averaging around 100 units a year. That's what we've been averaging. It hasn't been going like this, it's
No,
been
the
going
demand curve
like
is
that.
going like that, so I know we're trying to reduce.
That's
the demand,
right.
Which is a
Correct.
good thing.
Yeah,
So,
right.
the other challenge, the professor told us to
Mm.
water twice a week,
Mm-hmm.
okay? I can't do that on an odd even, because every week I'll be out of compliance. If I water every Sunday and Thursday on an odd even
Right.
schedule, I'm out of compliance
So-
every week.
What we're saying is, you can start watering now, odd, even numbered every other day if you want to, you can do that. But if we have to go into a more restrictive watering restriction, then it will be twice a week.
But I want to
And
restrict
if you-
myself now.
Well, you could do that. So let's just say, because you've got 2 days of even numbers, so let's say you're an even numbered household,
Right.
you could water twice a week on each even numbered days, on 2 even numbered days.
But I'd have to reschedule, reprogram my system every week.
No,
Yeah?
no,
Well, that depends,
It
on the
depends.
system he has.
right, right. All right, I'm gonna take one more question. This gentleman in the back had his hand up.
No, that's all right.
Okay, and one more question, then we gotta close it out here.
Because I
Yes.
see it every day, my wife has put in a request that the water tower be orange.
Sure, that will happen 20 years from now, when I'm no longer here. So,
She wants orange.
that's not gonna happen. All right.
Do the shrink wrap.
A shrink wrap, there you go. All right, with that, thank you very much for coming. Thank you for your questions and comments. We do appreciate them. And we will run those numbers as Mr. DeColius has asked. So, all right.
Are those gonna be included in your?
What we'll do is, they'll be posted on the website.
That'd be fine.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Because that's a very good question.
All right, with that, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.